My name is Ethan Hale. I'm 35 and I run a small, stubbornly principled marketing studio in Seattle. The kind of shop that keeps neighborhood bakeries and nonprofits visible while bigger agencies chase shinier things. Outside my window, the rain thins and thickens over the ship canal like breathing, and the city seems to listen back when you speak softly. On my desk this morning lay a fan of handwritten thank you cards, from clients' paper that still remembers hands. One note inked in loopy blue thanked me for catching a misplaced apostrophe. It made me smile because it felt like what my work is at its best. Noticing the quiet places where meaning leaks. My brother's world makes different noise. Chase's Instagram gleams with champagne light and glass railings and captions about building a life you don't have to take a vacation from. I don't begrudge him the applause, but applause has a way of deciding who counts, and it rarely counts the person who doesn't ask for it. That's the part that bruises not envy, but the arithmetic of attention. A new email slid into my inbox from my mother. Subject: Simple family dinner, let's reconnect. I opened it and felt the air change. 12 precise lines, careful punctuation words like celebrate and align set like crystal. I've worked in branding long enough to recognize tone when I hear it, the kind that sells harmony without promising truth. My family's great trick is volume control. We don't raise voices, we change the mix until the wrong parts go quiet. I closed the email and reached for a small wooden box on the cabinet, the one I labeled proof years ago on a night when I needed more gravity than sleep could give. Inside were scraps of the person I recognized, the first receipt I ever stapled to a job folder. A Polaroid of a rough logo that saved a deli, a printed email from my old English teacher that reads, "You make people seen." Under those sat a gold envelope, the kind with a flap that wants a seal edges softened by time. My grandmother gave it to me when I first moved to Seattle. "Open it when you're ready," she said. She was not a woman who dramatized anything. She measured worth in chores done and bills paid and kept a shoebox of warranties under the sink because paper, she believed, outlives intention. I turned the envelope over and let the gray light find it. Not today, I thought, and slid it back. The past has a way of cooperating when you ask it to wait. On the shelf, a framed photo from my graduation leans a little to the left. I'm not in it. I wrote the commencement speech that year, and my parents asked my older brother to deliver it because he commands a room. I told myself it didn't matter who read the words as long as the words were good. Later I learned how easily a life gets edited when you agree to disappear. In my family, love is the addendum, legacy is the clause. The rain softened to a mist. Somewhere down the hall, someone put on a jazz record and the trumpet climbed the stairwell like a handrail you could trust. I read my mother's email again. Family dinner. Friday at 7. Casual but special. I could hear the playlist already, the wine glasses singing intimacy. The choreography of a conversation that knows where it wants to land. Reconnect is a kind of promise. Sometimes it's also a price. I started to type an answer, erased it, and tried again. I'll be there. My finger hovered over the trackpad while a small familiar caution woke up behind my ribs. In families like ours, invitations are rarely just invitations. They are signatures waiting for consent. I hit send. The message left with a soft sound that felt larger than it should have. Out of habit, I glanced at the wooden box as if the gold envelope might have shifted in its sleep. It hadn't. It would wait the way good paper waits for the moment when you're willing to call things by their names. Friday at 7, my mother had written. We'll celebrate and align. I pocketed my keys and watched the rain stitch itself thin across the glass. Somewhere Chase was practicing the smile that photographs well. Somewhere a table was being set for 4. I told myself I was only going to dinner. It felt quietly like the first step of an audit. By Friday evening, the house in the suburbs was glowing. The way catalog homes glow lamps on dimmers, candles already breathing vanilla into the hall, a decanter of Pinot opened just far enough in advance to signal thoughtfulness. The china was the good set white with a thin cobalt ring, and the napkins were ironed into obedient triangles. I could smell lemon oil on the banister. This is what my mother is best at, a mood that looks like love. Richard was in the dining room rehearsing casual, swirling his glass as if it might give him better lines. Evelyn moved like a stage manager adjusting a fork here, a hinge of conversation there. Chase arrived 10 minutes late with Ava on his arm, two people photogenic even when backlit by a foyer. His cufflinks winked. Her dress murmured silk against the chair as she sat. We traded the small talk of people who know the script but are trying not to step on each other's cues. When the roast came down and the second bottle opened, Chase lifted his glass. "We've set the date," he said, and let the sentence pause just long enough to collect attention. Napa Valley. Ava leaned in a bright, rehearsed excitement that still managed to feel human. "We're working with a planner who only takes 3 weddings a year," she said. "The theme is intimate luxury." She explained terrace vows, a private tasting, a quartet that can learn any standard. The words painted money that pretended to whisper. My mother clasped her hands at her sternum the way people do in commercials for home insurance. "It will be a family moment," she said, "and we'd love a full buy-in." "This is about family legacy," my father added as if he'd practiced it in the rearview mirror. "Think of it as investing in the family's image." The sentences were warm and bloodless at once. I've sat in meetings where donors are courted with softer pressure. "Aunt Louise is covering the welcome dinner," someone said. A cousin had secured the vintage car. The list of contributions curved around the table like place cards with price tags. I set my glass down. "If you want my honest input," I said, and felt every eye retreat half an inch smaller. Could be better. Fewer people, more meaning. It's still Napa if there are fewer chairs. The room did the quiet thing expensive rooms do when a cheaper idea enters the silverware. Paused mid-air, the candle flame showed you how steady it could be. Ava looked at Chase. Chase's smile stayed on, but his eyes moved past me as if checking a mirror. My mother patted the tablecloth near my plate. "That's lovely, Ethan," she said. "But this is a statement about who we are together." Dessert arrived, a lemon tart with the glassy top my mother prides herself on. Conversation returned to safe topics, but there was a new calibration to it. An edge I recognized from budget meetings in boardrooms the moment after someone refuses the upsell. When I stood to leave, Evelyn walked me to the door with the hush of expensive carpet underfoot. At the threshold, she fixed my collar with a touch too light to be tender. "If you're not comfortable," she murmured, eyes bright with sympathy that never reaches the bloodstream, "don't feel obligated to attend." Velvet over steel. The sentence landed like a receipt. Outside, the air smelled like a sprinkler had just finished its rounds. I walked to my car and watched my mother's reflection hover in the sidelight of the porch. I could hear my father telling a story that ended with a toast and Chase's laugh sealing it. "In this family you belong when you make us look good." The thought wasn't bitter, it was inventory. I sat behind the wheel and let the engine idle while the lemon tart cooled on the counter inside a prize I hadn't competed for. The email arrived at 8 the next morning, tidy as an invoice. Subject: wedding update. Body guest list finalized, hope you celebrate in spirit. The signature block had a quote about excellence in real estate and a link to a recent feature. I read it twice, the way you read a clause before you initial it. The anger didn't spike. It settled the way a level bubble finds the true line. Invitations here were never just invitations. They were draft agreements, and I had declined to sign. I made coffee and watched the city rinse itself in a thin rain. My laptop waited on the table with a familiar, indifferent glow. Somewhere in a folder I hadn't opened in months were the passwords to the investor portal for Hale Family Investment, LLC. If love speaks to me in line items, I thought I'll answer in ledger. I moved the mug aside, pulled the chair in, and placed my fingers on the keys, ready to see what belonged to whom and how long it had been called something else. The portal opened on the second try after a texted code, and the small, guilty feeling that comes from typing a password you set back when you still believed families were default safe. The living room was dark except for the aquarium blue of my screen and the spreadsheet grid that always makes me breathe slower. Hale Family Investment, LLC blinked into view with the welcome a bank gives: your name, your units, your balance, and a list that pretends to be neutral. I hold 27%. I've told myself for years that meant voice, not just exposure. I clicked through the ledger. The labels were bland to the point of anesthesia: consulting services, strategic engagement, advisory, retainer. Numbers that begin with a 2 and end in 5 zeros. Over and over, the recipients repeated with a drumbeat regularity that had nothing to do with market cycles and everything to do with Convenience Vineline Concepts, LLC. CH Legacy Projects, LLC. I said the names out loud in my empty apartment, and the room answered with the hum of the refrigerator and the rain. Each transfer line carried the same clean justification language, like a template built to pass a glance. The balance in the main operating account stepped down month by month, like a staircase carved into soft stone. I started a separate sheet and built a timeline date by date. On one side, the disbursements: April 7th, May 22nd, June 15th. Each tagged consulting services or strategic engagement. On the other side, everything I knew about the wedding's progress: venue scouting in spring. A deposit window: most Napa estates demand the way planners front-load retainers. The columns lined up with the precision of a guilty conscience. A little more cross-referencing, and I found a transfer that matched the size and season of a venue deposit, routed first to Vineline and then out again, the kind of hop a person makes when they'd rather no one recognize the footprint. Then I opened the corporate folder. Operating agreement. Amendments. There's a particular breath you take when you open a document you're afraid might hurt you. Amendment number 3, 18 months ago. My eyes set to work on the language, even as a part of me tried to negotiate with it. The change was short but hungry: the old requirement that Class B members consent to transactions over $250,000 had been struck. In its place, a sentence that left managing members with the steering wheel and the radio on loud. Consent, it said, may be evidenced by electronic acknowledgement. Below, a single PDF labeled proof of consent. I clicked. It was a screenshot of an email. Subject line: RE Amendment number 3. The body looks good, E. My name is initial. My supposed approval is a shrug. For a long half-minute, I didn't do anything but stare at the quotation marks around my consent as if they might fall off by themselves. Then I opened the file info, edited the metadata set a week after the date in the header. The sending domain wasn't my studio's email. It was a lookalike that would pass under a casual glance a hyphen, where there shouldn't be a lowercase l impersonating a capital I. I checked my own archives. No such message sent, no such thread received. The shape of my agreement without the act of agreeing. I took screenshots of everything, named the files like a person who expects to print them for someone wearing a suit. 3.1 Ledger Disbursements, Vineline. PDF 3.2 Ledger Disbursements, CH Legacy, PDF 3.3 Amendment, Redline, PDF 3.4 Proof of Consent Metadata, MT. I exported the cash flow as a CSV and highlighted the months where the staircase dropped 2 steps at once. In the corner of the screen, the account balance sat where a heartbeat would be. They call it a family fund. I see an anonymous ATM. Somewhere around midnight, the rain traded itself for a wind that knew my windows. I stood stretched and walked to the filing cabinet. The wooden box waited where I'd left it, but I didn't touch the gold envelope. Not yet. Instead, I added a fresh flash drive labeled Exhibits and watched the progress bar chew through my anger and spit it out as files. Revenge, it turns out, isn't a speech. It's a timestamp and a chain of custody. Back at the table, I returned to the ledger and found a memo line I had missed: Strategic Engagement Heritage Position Study. Nothing illegal about the words themselves, just the way they leaned against each other to disguise the weight they were carrying. I dragged the line into my timeline, matched it to a payment made 2 weeks before a reasonable Napa deposit window would close, and the grid on my screen snapped into a picture even my mother's dimmers couldn't soften. I dialed a number I'd saved for years and never used. The ring came fast, 1 and 2, and then a voice I recognized from an article about small businesses that win the wrong fights. "Marissa Chen," she said. I looked at the stack of screenshots, the forged shrug of my consent, the staircase where money used to be. "I have something you need to see," I told her. "Tomorrow morning," she said, no hesitation. "Bring everything. And Ethan, don't email any of it to your family." I ended the call and stared at amendment number 3 still open on my screen, its red line like a cut that hadn't scabbed. The cursor blinked at the bottom of the document, patient as a metronome. I closed the laptop to make the blinking stop and listened to the wind find a loose corner on the window frame. Somewhere a house in Napa was holding a date. In Seattle, I held a folder that would decide what that date would cost. Marissa's office sat 3 floors above a coffee shop that smelled like burnt caramel and resolve. The rain had rinsed itself into a gray film, and my shoes left quiet punctuation on the hallway carpet. Inside the conference room was all whiteboard and glass. A table scattered with printouts of my screenshots, a legal pad scrawled with arrows, and a ceramic mug of coffee gone the color of old pennies. Marissa skimmed in silence the way good surgeons study a scan, then looked up, sharp awake in a way the room wasn't yet. "Here's the spine," she said, tapping amendment number 3 with the back of her pen. "Your parents as managing members owe duties of loyalty and care to you, the minority member. That means no self-dealing, no undisclosed related party transactions, and no changing consent thresholds by sleight of hand. This electronic acknowledgement with a look-alike domain. On its best day, it's sloppy. On its worst day, it's a forgery." She slid the ledger toward me. "We'll plead breach of fiduciary duty, self-dealing, and oppression of a minority member. And because timing matters, we won't ask the court to fix your whole childhood. We'll ask it to stop the bleeding now." She stood and drew a 4-step map across the whiteboard. "Complaint, motion, hearing, remedies. We file a complaint in Superior Court within 10 to 14 days. At the same time, we file a motion for a temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction. The relief we seek is practical, not theatrical. Freeze non-essential disbursements from the LLC immediately. Compel a full accounting within 30 days, and ask the court to appoint a temporary independent manager, Graham Collins, if the court accepts our recommendation to manage the entity while we sort the mess." She turned back. "You'll hear phrases at the hearing: likelihood of success on the merits, irreparable harm, balance of equities, public interest. You don't need to memorize them. You just need to give me clean facts and clean exhibits." I nodded and she pivoted to tactics. "Subpoenas go out the door with the complaint. We'll subpoena the bank for wire records and signature cards. Vendors tied to the wedding, the planner, the venue, the florist, lighting, photo, and video for invoices, contracts, and any correspondence with Chase or the Shells. We'll subpoena the registered agents for Vineline Concepts and CH Legacy projects and the email host tied to that lookalike domain for creation and access logs. She lifted a finger. Washington is a two-party consent state. Don't record calls. Voicemails are fine. Emails and texts are better. We'll let their replies bury them. She pointed to a second list labeled holds. We served litigation hold notices on your parents, Chase, and the LLC. No deletion of emails, no shredding, no routine systems purges. If they slip, the court can sanction them for spoliation. Meanwhile, we preserve your files with hash values so chain of custody is bulletproof. Your screenshots become exhibits with Bates numbers. The court likes paper trails that walk in a straight line. I told her about the staircase in the account balance, the memo lines that dressed up personal pageantry as corporate strategy, and the way the transfers matched Napa's deposit calendar as neatly as a set table. She listened without interrupting, then drew a small box on the whiteboard and wrote the word leverage inside it. 2 more anchors, she said. First, that amendment number 3, with your alleged consent, its metadata is our friend. Second, you mentioned your grandmother and a sealed envelope. If there's any side letter about your contribution, bring it. Loan to own language can move you from just a minority member to a priority creditor. Judges sit up straighter for creditors. We spent an hour building a working list bank of Cascadia wire details and KYC docs St. Helena Reserve venue contract and deposit schedule, Bellefleur Floral invoices, and any collaboration agreements. Lumiere AV lighting packages. Mira Studio photography retainer. The Planners LLC. The Shell's registered agents and the domain registrar for the false consent email. She dictated a preservation email to the LLC's general inbox that read like a velvet-gloved warning shot. I watched the whiteboard fill until it looked like a war plan someone meant to win without raising their voice. Service of process, I asked. She snapped the cap on her pen. A professional process server will handle it. Not at the altar. We're not making TikToks. We're making orders. Rehearsal dinner is cleaner. Then the hearing lands about 10 days after the wedding, and we walk in with exhibits that smell like chain of custody and common sense. She leaned back, assessing me the way a coach examines a runner's stride. Don't engage. Don't explain. The next words your family hears from you should come packaged in a caption that begins Exhibit A. Don't shout. Let the papers make the noise. Silence is a volume if you time it right, I said, and felt the sentence seat itself somewhere sturdy. She slid an engagement letter across the table and a folder labeled Draft Subpoenas. I initialed where the tabs told me to sign where her finger rested and wrote the retainer check with a hand. That didn't shake. When we were done, she stacked the papers into a pile that already felt heavier than the room's air. Bring me anything else that breathes like proof, she said. And think about insiders. Someone always keeps receipts. On the sidewalk, the rain had backed off, leaving the city glazed and watchful. I stood under the awning and scrolled through a mental Rolodex of names I'd trained myself not to need. A bookkeeper with too much conscience for Chase's brand. A CPA who never looked comfortable in his photos. Then a name surfaced cleanly like a float you didn't know you'd tied to the pier, Monica Del Vega. My thumb hovered over a search bar as a bus hissed past. If receipts exist, I thought she'll know where they sleep. Tacoma smelled like wet cedar and espresso pulled by someone who believed crema could forgive most sins. I found Monica Del Vega at a corner table with her back to the wall, a legal pad open, and a cappuccino cooling into a brown ring. She stood to shake my hand, without smiling the way people do when they've been punished for being right. Up close, she had the careful stillness of a person who has watched too many numbers get told to pretend they mean something else. "I worked for your brother 3 years," she said, sliding a folder between us. "Long enough to learn the difference between marketing and laundering." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. They asked me to reclassify expenses, image events, brand collaborations so they'd look like consulting. I refused. I left. I kept my work papers. She tapped the folder. Not copies of company returns, nothing that breaks privilege. My notes, email headers, draft invoices. Enough breadcrumbs for a court to subpoena the bakery. I let the metaphor sit. Outside headlights braided rain along Pacific Avenue. Monica uncapped a pen and wrote a list where my eye couldn't help but follow. When you serve subpoenas, ask for a vendor called Wine and Vine Estates. You'll find an invoice titled Venue Investment Consulting for around $275. It's not an analysis. It's a deposit. The planner's retainer comes through a shell watch for round numbers. Bellefleur handles florals. Lumiere does lighting. There's a photography retainer paid to a studio based in Capri, pretty invoices, terrible metadata. She looked up. Money leaves footprints. Your job is to make them look at the floor. I'm bringing my lawyer into this conversation, I said, and she nodded like that was the only adult answer. We moved to Marissa's office an hour later, the three of us around a table that had already learned my handwriting. Monica gave a proffer with the care of a bomb squad tech dates. Names of entities, subject lines, the direction of wires, where to subpoena without wasting a judge's patience. Marissa asked the kind of questions that turn a hunch into an affidavit. When we were done, Monica pushed back her chair. "Serve me with a subpoena and I'll produce legally," she said. "I don't leak. I testify." That night, my apartment became a lab. I printed emails and voicemails calendars from the year they started calling parties strategy. I numbered everything with Bates stamps. HFI 000002 until the stack felt like it could hold the table down if the building shook. I wrote an exhibits list in fonts judges seemed to like, and for the first time in a long time I recognized myself not as the quiet son, but as the adult in the room. Revenge wasn't a fantasy anymore, it was a paperweight with a date. The wooden box on the filing cabinet waited as if it had always been meant for this week. I opened it and fingered the gold envelope until the paper warmed. My grandmother's script tilted forward like a person ready to stand. I slid a butter knife under the flap and felt an old life let go. The letter inside was short-typed on a machine that must have been older than me, with her signature in blue. It named my contribution as a loan to own to the Hale Family Investment LLC, with a covenant requiring equal treatment and a priority right of repayment in the event of breach. She'd attached a side schedule recognizing my units and the terms under which the loan converts. I set the page next to Amendment Number 3 and felt the leverage click into place, a gear finally finding its partner. By midnight, the subpoenas were drafted: Bank of Cascadia for wire details and KY St. Helena Reserve for the venue contract and deposit schedule, Bellefleur for florals and any collaboration agreements, Lumiere for lighting packages, Mira Studio and Capri for the retainer, the Planners LLC, the registered agents for Vineline and CH Legacy, the registrar for the look-alike email domain. Marissa's paralegal spun up litigation holds: no deletion, no overwrites, no routine maintenance. We hashed my files to lock chain of custody. Revenge, I learned, requires more patience than anger. At 1 in the morning, I called the process server recommended by Marissa. "Not at the ceremony," I said, "no theatrics." He laughed like a man who's seen too many theatrics to be entertained by them. Rehearsal dinner then, he said. Clean and courteous. We'll get ID photographs, timestamps, a declaration. He texted 5 minutes later. Service scheduled rehearsal 7 p.m. I stared at the message until the blue blurred. In the quiet that follows, a decision objects. Make their own kind of sound. The printer cooling, the envelope's flap relaxing back into place, the refrigerator clicking because it can. My phone buzzed with a new email from the Superior Court filing received case assigned hearing window to be set. I closed my eyes and saw a vineyard staged for a promise. In the morning, I'd pick up the certified copies and the stamped envelopes. For now, I stood in the doorway and looked at the table covered in exhibits and thought of Monica's sentence. Tomorrow, I would make them look at the floor. Evelyn chose a hotel sitting room with low lamps and thick curtains, the kind of room designed to make people forget the time. She wore the soft smile she saves for funerals and fundraisers, and a leather portfolio lay between us like a sleeping animal. I want peace, she began, and slid the portfolio open to reveal a non-disclosure agreement and a one-page codicil to the will. $200,000, she said, if you agree to confidentiality and a no-contest clause. We close this within the family and everyone moves forward. There was even a pen already uncapped, as if ink itself could make it gentle. I read like a mechanic listens to an engine. The NDA outlawed speech that might impugn reputation, and the codicil disinherited me if I challenged any future distributions. I set them down and watched her face for proof that she believed this was mercy. Mom, I said. Amendment number 3 was evidenced, with a look-alike domain and a backdated edit. That isn't consent, that's camouflage. And my grandmother's side letter frames my contribution as a loan to own with priority repayment if covenants are breached. You're not offering peace, you're offering a receipt for silence. Her fingers tightened around the pen just long enough to tell the truth. You've always valued meaning over optics, she said. This is both. I slid the papers back across the coffee table. I'm not selling my voice. If it helps, think of this as me investing in the family's image by cleaning it up. An hour later, as the afternoon sun sharpened into Napa gold, my phone buzzed with a text from the process server. Served on Chase Hale at rehearsal dinner, 7:03 p.m. ID photo attached. Declaration to follow. Courteous service. I exhaled in a way I hadn't known. I'd been holding my breath. It was one thing to feel wronged. It was another to see the timestamp. The next day, the vineyard looked like money pretending to whisper. Rows of Pinot grapes sloped toward a chapel with whitewashed walls and a bell that could announce either vows or evacuations. Chairs stood in perfect geometry, a string quartet tuned. I moved along the gravel path, a guest in a navy blazer and a steady heartbeat. 10 steps from the chapel, Evelyn stepped into my path and placed a hand on the doorframe like a border guard. You don't belong here, she said, soft as velvet and hard as a latch. I belong to the truth of this place, I said. It's overdue. I waited until the photographer lowered her lens and the planner nodded a tiny approval to the quartet. Chase stood near the steps, arranging the line of his smile. I approached without hurry and stopped at a polite distance, a courtesy copy in a manila envelope in my hand. Congratulations, I said, and extended it. He frowned into the paper like it might explain itself. I leaned in just enough for his ears and no one else's. You were served last night, I said. Hearing in 10 days. Read it before dessert. The envelope made a sound I recognized when the flap broke, the thinnest possible version of a door closing. Phones rose like flowers following the sun. You don't have to try to be seen when a scene offers itself. People record to make sure their memories agree with one another later. Across the aisle, Ava's eyes found mine with a confusion that wasn't performative. For a second, she looked like a person who has been carried along by a river she mistook for a road. I gave a small nod and stepped back, leaving space for the ceremony to behave as if it could still be what it had promised. By evening, a clip of the exchange had left the vineyard and entered its second life. The caption did most of the storytelling, Brother Hans' lawsuit at luxury wedding. Comments did the rest. Around midnight, a polite email landed from one of Ava's brand partners. In light of recent developments, we are pausing our collaboration pending a risk review. It was the corporate version of a flinch. I thought of the line items I'd traced and how quickly image becomes inventory. Back in my hotel room, the window framed a sky turning from bruise to navy. I set the empty envelope on the desk beside my notes and listened to the quiet return. In my house, applause costs more than truth. Today, truth is cheap but carries far. The room buzzed twice, first from Marissa's paralegal confirming the hearing date was locking in. Then from an unknown number with a single line, "We have invoices you'll want to see." A minute later, my phone lit again with a text from Ava. "Can we talk somewhere no one is filming?" The anonymous envelope waited on Marissa's conference table like a dare. No return address, a florist's logo stamped in pale ink, and inside 2 invoices that told 2 different truths. The first was addressed to Hale Family Investment LLC, labeled Image Events Corporate Activation Line Items for Installations and Blooms that read like a garden inventory, full price and paid in 2 wires. The second, same date, same quantities, same designer notes, carried the heading Private Wedding and showed a 100% credit with a single sentence in italics, courtesy comped under marketing collaboration. Stapled to the back was an internal memo about a promotional rebate flowing to CH Legacy Projects, a round number transfer that moved like a marble down a known chute. Marissa didn't curse, but the way she exhaled had consonants. She slipped on gloves, scanned each page, and angled the paper to the light. "Same order, 2 ledgers," she said, marking the headers with a yellow pen. "Corporate pays retail. Personal gets comped. Difference boomerangs to the shell. That's not messy bookkeeping, that's design." The memo's signature block was a blur of initials, but the bank details were crisp enough to hum. She turned to her paralegal. "Bates, these file a supplemental declaration, send a notice of new exhibits to opposing counsel and the court. And preserve the envelope chain of custody, starts with an address no one wrote." We added the florist to the submenu of subpoenas already warming in the queue. Then pulled the thread to lighting and photography. Bellefleur's credit ledger mirrored the florist's collaboration credit applied to private wedding, while Image Events remained at full freight. Lumiere's package listed architectural wash and brand halo phrases that pretend to be light and tell you their stage direction. Mira Studios' retainer showed a Capri address, elegant kerning, and metadata that refused to line up with the date in the corner. On a legal pad, Marissa wrote the words "systemic and self-dealing" like items waiting for a cashier. "They're charging likes as capital expense," I said. She looked at me and didn't smile. "And the court understands math." A text from an unknown number pinged while we were still stamping exhibits. "Meet where the caterers load out. No cameras. 5 minutes." The gravel path behind the chapel was a corridor of shade in a day that had otherwise decided to glow. Ava stood there in flats and a dress that looked relieved to be simple. Up close, she was less filtered and more human, a person whose life had been staged until the stagehands got sloppy. She handed me her phone. The email on the screen read, "As discussed, your wedding florals will be comped as part of a collaboration. In exchange, our brand will be tagged on specified posts and receive media assets." Beneath it were smiley faces that made the promise feel young. I was told it's a comped collaboration, she said, fingers tightening around the case until the silicone whitened. I thought we were trading photos, not. Whatever this is. Her voice didn't crack. It just arrived without its makeup. I nodded. You don't have to put your name on anything I said. Truth travels without autographs. She glanced toward the chapel and then back at me. I don't know what legacy means anymore, she said. It feels like a word you put on the box when you're selling people. I thought of the invoices and the way a family can turn even a vow into an asset class. You're not on trial, I said. A ledger is. Back in Seattle by evening, the air was honest with rain again and the office smelled like printer heat and patience. Marissa drafted a short, tight notice to the court. Additional invoices from vendors reflecting double billing and a marketing rebate to CH legacy projects. Attached scans chain of custody declaration request to consider at the preliminary injunction hearing. She sent a parallel letter to opposing counsel that read like a bridge with a toll booth. Within an hour, Chambers replied the judge would accept supplemental exhibits and maintain the hearing date. We highlighted the florist pages, the lighting phrase brand halo, the Capri retainer, and the line where the rebate doubled back into our family's shadow. The picture hardened. Vendors weren't just billing twice. The system had choreography bill the LLC under image comp. The private event under collab route, the difference back through a shell with a marketing bow. It was theft with an Instagram filter, and somewhere along the way, even good people had mistaken lighting cues for sunlight. I stared at the stack until the edges felt lighter than the center. The anger didn't flare. It settled clear as a pain that's finally been wiped. They're charging likes as capital expense, I repeated, and this time it wasn't a joke. It was a count. Marissa capped her pen. We go in with clean facts, clean witnesses, and a story even a skeptic can follow, she said. Let them explain to a judge how a centerpiece built equity. Then her phone lit with a scheduling email from the clerk, hearing set for 10 days from service 9:00 a.m. Courtroom 4B. She slid it to me with a fingertip. Your family has always loved calendars, she said. Now the court owns the next one. I walked to the window and watched a bus smear its reflection along the curb. Somewhere the vineyard lights were coming on for the rehearsal dinner's second act. In the morning, we'd finalize the exhibit binders. For tonight, I put Ava's email into the file and closed the lid, hearing the click that means a thing is ready for its day. The courtroom smelled faintly of lemon oil and cold coffee. The kind of morning scent that tells you decisions will be made whether anyone is ready or not. I sat beside Marissa at the plaintiff's table and watched the clerk flip the digital docket to our case. The wood-paneled walls felt older than anyone in the room. They have seen more promises broken than any vineyard bell ever will. When the judge entered, everything recalibrated to her pace, a quiet that wasn't deference so much as gravity. Marissa stood first. She didn't perform. She arranged facts. A capital table on the screen, my 27%, my dates of contribution, and the staircase of dwindling balances that had left me exposed. She walked the court through Amendment number 3 with the calm of a person reading a weather report everyone already knows is true. The consent requirement for transactions over $250,000 struck 18 months ago with electronic acknowledgement supported by a look-alike domain and metadata that had the nerve to tell its own story. Then the wire trail, Vineline Concepts, CH Legacy Projects, transfers that kept their shirts clean by changing logos. Finally, the florist invoices in 2 versions and 1 reality, and the side letter my grandmother signed that called my stake what it really was, a loan to own with priority repayment when covenants are breached. She used the phrase self-dealing the way a carpenter says rot. Opposing counsel cleared his throat into a microphone that was already too loud. He asked for room to resolve this internally, said the family is aligned on a path forward and that embarrassment is not in anyone's interests. He smiled in the way people do when they're billing by the hour. The judge listened as if she were weighing ingredients. When he finished, she leaned forward and pushed her glasses higher on her nose. "Counsel," she said, "this isn't a dinner argument, it's a fiduciary duty." What followed moved with the certainty of a checklist. On likelihood of success, she nodded to the paper trail that walked in a straight line. On irreparable harm, she cited the ease with which money becomes memory. On balance of equities, she observed that the remedy I sought preserved the status quo rather than punished a future. On public interest, she said family companies are still companies. Then she read the order as if dictating the weather. Effective immediately, non-essential disbursements from Hale Family Investment LLC are frozen. Within 30 days, the defendants shall provide a full accounting including bank statements, wire confirmations, vendor contracts, and any communications reflecting related party transactions. Graham Collins is appointed temporary independent manager with authority to approve only essential expenditures and to safeguard assets pending further order of this court. All parties are enjoined from deleting, altering, or destroying documents or data. Litigation holds shall be honored. Spoliation will invite sanctions. Status conference set in 30 days, 9 a.m. This courtroom. The gavel was a small sound that landed like a heavy thing. Beside me, Marissa's pen stopped moving. Across the aisle, the light went out of Chase's posture, not all at once, but in a way the body notices the shoulders, remembering their actual weight. I felt the room's oxygen return to me in a rush I hadn't asked for. In a single page, the court had unplugged the machine he'd been running on my voltage. We gathered our binders and the clerk handed Marissa a stamped copy still warm from the printer. Paper has a temperature when it matters. As we stepped into the hallway, the building's air changed to something more human, shoes on tile, the whisper of suits, the soft struggle of people deciding how to tell new truths to old friends. Richard stood near a column, hands folded like he was praying for an exit. He looked smaller without the room believing him. "Ethan," he said, and then stopped to choose a word that didn't sound like surrender. 5 minutes. Behind him, opposing counsel pretended to study his phone. Richard's gaze left and returned like a man testing a door he knows is locked. I nodded once. If there was a confession to be made, I preferred it not be rehearsed. Before we moved, Marissa touched my sleeve, a brief pressure and a whisper meant for me alone. "No deals in hallways," she said. "Listen, promise nothing. If they talk NDA, we talk regulators." I looked past her to the courtroom doors, back to my father, and felt the order in my hand, like a steadying weight. The judge had given us a calendar and a custodian. For the first time in years, time felt like an ally. Richard gestured toward a quieter alcove. "We can fix this," he said, voice lowered, the confidence not quite making the trip from his throat to his eyes. "There are ways to make everyone whole without spectacle." Somewhere down the corridor, a bailiff called another case, and the word whole echoed more like a question than an offer. I followed him 3 steps, stopped where the light changed from courtroom gold to hallway gray, and waited. His mouth opened on the shape of a proposition. My phone vibrated with a new email from Chambers confirming the appointment of the independent manager. In the corner of the screen, another message arrived from opposing counsel, this time subject line: "Confidential resolution framework." I looked at my father and thought, this is where the set falls down or the truth stands up. I understand and will follow your instructions. Write Part 9 in English. 550, 750 words, first person, smoothly continuing from Part 8. Include all specified plot points. Richard's confession and motive-heavy NDA and Marissa's counter with regulator carve-outs and tax risk. My ethical conditions of governance and scholarship, the other side's concessions on restitution, fees, governance, scholarship, emphasize injustice, tension, revenge for a 40-plus U.S. audience. Escalate the drama, end with a mini cliffhanger to lead into Part 10, no separators or technical symbols present in clear, distinct paragraphs without merging them. Richard led me to a quiet alcove where the courthouse gold gave way to hallway gray. For a moment we just stood there, father and son, with a stamped order between us like a translation neither of us had learned. "We can fix this," he said, then lowered his voice as if truth were a species that startles. "I was afraid of slipping. The market turned on me last year. A deal went underwater. Chase had a way to keep the lights bright. I let him polish the name with money that wasn't his to spend. His hands worried the edge of a handkerchief. I thought I could keep the family together with the family name." "You bought time with my equity," I said. Somewhere down the hall, a copier hummed like a clock that doesn't care who's late. Reputation is the most expensive thing to buy with someone else's money. We moved to a conference room that smelled faintly of paper and ambition. Opposing counsel arrived with a slim folder and the expression of a man who bills in increments of 6 minutes. "We propose a confidential resolution." He began sliding an NDA across the table. The terms were heavy enough to bend the air: no disparagement, no disclosure to any party, liquidated damages. If a whisper escaped, and a clause that tried to outlaw gravity, no statements reasonably likely to affect perception. Attached was a framework that read like a hush, a partial payment now, a few promises later, and the suggestion that we all learn to forget efficiently. Marissa didn't lean forward. She let the paper come to her and read with the calm of an accountant at year-end. "No," she said, and pointed to the language with the tip of her pen. "NDA carve-outs for reporting to regulators are non-negotiable. You don't gag the IRS, the Attorney General, or the court-appointed manager. Collins already has the files and a tax advisor has been engaged. The longer this lingers, the more your exposure compounds. We don't trade a gag for a lie." She slid the NDA back as if returning a plate to a buffet. "You want quiet, earn it with restitution and governance. What do you want then?" Opposing counsel asked a question that sounded like a dare. "I don't need a new family photo," I said. "I need a new operating agreement." I laid out terms that felt less like punishment and more like scaffolding: full restitution in tranches with interest, attorney fees paid. A hard rule that any related party transaction is subject to approval by the independent manager for 24 months. Quarterly reporting to members, and a small scholarship in my grandmother's name for accounting students at the local community college. If the family name means anything, I added, let it sponsor a ledger someone can trust. The lawyer glanced at Richard, then at his phone, calculating the price of digging in. He tried again with the NDA, softer this time. Limited confidentiality, he offered mutual non-disparagement exceptions for lawful process. Marissa held up a hand. "We already told Chambers we'd accept supplemental exhibits. The judge has eyes. And the manager is running a forensic accounting. If we're still here in 30 days, you'll be negotiating with numbers, not with me." Richard exhaled in a way that emptied his posture. He looked older in this light, the kind of older that arrives not with birthdays, but with math. "If we agree," he said, "does this end?" I met his eyes. "It ends when it's honest." He nodded, a small motion like a man who's finally heard the meter click. Opposing counsel scratched a draft into his pad: restitution schedule, governance amendments. Independent approval for insiders, legal fees, scholarship announcement. His pen paused over the amount. Marissa supplied it without blinking. We broke for 10 minutes while they called Chase. Through the glass, I watched Richard listen to his son on speaker eyes on the carpet, as if the pattern might offer a loophole. When they returned, the edge had sanded down. "We can meet," the number counsel said. "We'll need 60 days for the final tranche." Marissa tapped the order from the judge. "You have 30 for the accounting. Tie your schedule to facts, not wishes, and the scholarship goes out with your first payment press release, drafted by us, not by your PR firm." Richard looked at me with something like apology trying on courage. "I thought I could keep the family together with the family name," he repeated softer. "Names don't hold people," I said. "Rules do." The room felt steadier when I said it. For the first time since this began, revenge didn't feel like heat. It felt like alignment. We sketched signatures on a term sheet that would become a settlement if the next calendar kept its promises. As I capped the pen, my phone buzzed. An email from Collins' preliminary review indicates additional undisclosed transfers. Potential tax characterization issues flagged. Expanded accounting to follow. Marissa read over my shoulder and lifted an eyebrow. "Their number just got cheaper," she murmured. Opposing counsel's phone lit at the same moment. His jaw tightened a tick that told the truth faster than his words would. "We'll confirm by morning," he said, voice newly careful. In the hall, as they left to brief Chase, Richard paused by the door. "I thought I could keep the family together with the family name," he said a third time, as if repetition might convert regret into restitution. "You keep a family together by telling it the truth," I answered, "and paying what you owe." He nodded once and was gone. Back at the table, Marissa stacked the papers into two neat piles, the terms we could live with and the ones that would be measured against the accounting. "Either they sign into honesty," she said, "or we walk into discovery." I slipped my grandmother's side letter back into the folder and felt its weight settle like a promise finally kept. My phone buzzed again, this time from Chambers, slotting our status conference for 30 days at 9 a.m., and I realized the calendar had finished choosing sides. I lifted the pen to initial the draft when a new subject line flashed from Collins' preliminary totals exceed offer by 7%. Recommend adjusting restitution. I met Marissa's eyes and she smiled the way lawyers do when gravity starts working for you. "Shall we let the numbers finish the negotiation?" she said. I set the pen down and waited for the door to open. Graham Collins's office had the tidy warmth of a banker who still believes in pencils. The settlement papers sat in a neat stack on the conference table. The top sheet stamped with today's date, and the case caption that had learned to pronounce our last name without decoration. Marissa read aloud the marrow of the deal while Collins followed with a finger like a metronome. "Restitution to my account in 3 tranches with interest. Attorney fees paid. A hard rule for 24 months that any related party transaction needs the independent manager's approval. Quarterly reporting to members and the scholarship in my grandmother's name for accounting students at the community college 2 towns over. Justice doesn't make me someone new. It returns me to the version they edited out." I said mostly to myself and signed where the tabs asked. Collins countersigned with the quiet satisfaction of a man who prefers math to drama. The wire confirmation for the first tranche came through before the coffee cooled. Numbers have a way of sounding like apologies when they arrive on time. Marissa slid me a separate document, my withdrawal from Hale Family Investment LLC, to be filed upon final payment. I initialed each page, felt the small ache of ending a sentence that had been allowed to run on, and put down the pen. Collins folded the signed term sheet into a folder labeled with our case number and the word "completed" penciled in the corner. It looked ordinary, which felt exactly right. I drove south the next week with the box labeled "proof" buckled into the passenger seat, and the rest of my life in the trunk. The Oregon coast receives you the way a sober friend hands you water. The rental cottage was plain pine and clean air, a short walk from a cliff where the ocean practices certainty. I registered Signal North LLC with a name that felt like a compass rather than a flag. The first clients were a seafood shack that overcooked its story and a land trust that undertold its own. We built small campaigns that kept their promises, and I realized the sound of a business working is a quiet click like a latch aligning. On a Tuesday that smelled like rain and salt, Mr. Shaw walked into the cafe where I pretend not to write. He held up the local paper folded to an opinion column. The headline was simple enough to be true: "Justice begins with a ledger." The piece talked about how communities are just families writ wider, how our best laws are just rules we wish our uncles had kept. No names, no details, just the good kind of sermon, short and more about us than about me. He didn't ask questions and I didn't explain. We sat with our mugs until the steam stopped and said goodbye like men who understand gratitude doesn't need an audience. At night, when the town went to one long traffic light, I opened the wooden box and added new pages to the old ones, the scholarship announcement printed from the college's website. A receipt for a camera I'd bought a decade ago to make a client feel seen. The letter from Collins confirming the second tranche had landed. At the bottom of the box was the gold envelope, now returned to ordinary paper after doing its extraordinary job. I smoothed the side letter with my palm and thanked the woman who had written me a law before I knew how to need it. The last wire came on a Wednesday morning with the tide going out. Marissa texted a single word, "Done," and a photo of the filed withdrawal. I stood in my small office and let the silence widen until it felt like a room I could stay in. Then I pulled out a sheet of paper and wrote a letter I won't send. Dear Chase. I forgave him on the page without absolving the math, told him I wouldn't carry him as a unit of account anymore and that his name would no longer be a mirror. I checked to see if I was real. I folded the letter twice, slid it into the box, and closed the lid with the carefulness you give to something finished. That evening, the wind came hard off the Pacific and cleaned the sky down to its bones. I walked to the cliff and stood where the grass gives up. Below, the ocean kept doing the only job it trusts, taking weight and returning motion. I thought about all the paper that had carried me here, agreements that lied, exhibits that told the truth, a scholarship that would teach someone how to measure. I thought about the room where my father had tried to make a name carry what a rule could not, and about the young woman who had mistaken a collaboration for a kindness. Then I let those thoughts settle like sand after a wave steps back. I didn't feel larger. I felt sized correctly. Revenge had not been fire. It had been alignment. Money came home, rules were repaired, and a small scholarship would put a ledger in young hands that might someday keep a family honest. As dusk reached for the water, I spoke aloud to no one in particular, just to put a period on the sentence, "Justice doesn't make me someone new. It returns me to the version they edited out." The wind took the words without ceremony, and the ocean filed them somewhere under finished work. I turned for home with the knowledge that the calendar, the numbers, and my name were finally on speaking terms. When the papers were signed and the last wire cleared, Ethan didn't feel triumphant. He felt accurate. Money returned to the account it should never have left, rules were rewritten so the next quiet son wouldn't have to shout, and a small scholarship carried his grandmother's name forward with the dignity she'd lent it. The ocean in Oregon kept its appointment with the cliffs, and for the first time in years, his calendar, his conscience, and his last name agreed. If this story sat with you, if you've ever been asked to trade truth for appearances, stay with us. Subscribe for more real-world dramas where the stakes aren't special effects but bank statements, signatures, and second chances. Share this video with someone who needs the reminder that calm is not the same as silence. And tell me in the comments, what would justice have looked like to you? Private forgiveness, public accountability, or something in between? Your perspective could be the light someone else is missing. I read everything, and some of your stories may inspire future episodes. One last question to carry into the discussion: when family and fairness collide, is there ever a right moment to keep the peace? If the price is the truth, or does loyalty end where the ledger begins?